Every day, we witness the dark shadows that lurk in the corners of our world. People can inflict pain in ways that defy comprehension. This harsh reality is an inescapable part of life. As someone who explores the realm of crime, I delve into the most shocking stories, seeking to understand the motivations behind such acts. I'm Michael, and today I present to you a harrowing true crime tale. It began as an ordinary morning in Graham, Pennsylvania, until the piercing sound of gunfire shattered the calm. Inside a quaint home nestled near the woods, a man crumpled to the floor, gasping for his final breath. Moments later, his wife emerged from the bedroom, her heart racing with confusion and terror at the chaos unfolding around her. What she encountered froze her in place. A shadowy figure loomed in the living room, gun in hand. Silence enveloped the scene for a fleeting moment. But then the gunfire erupted again. By sunrise, the house lay in eerie stillness. There were no valuables taken, no evidence of a break-in marred the tranquil abode. Just two lifeless bodies, side by side, covered with a blanket, an unsettling attempt to conceal the grim reality of the situation. Who could commit such a heinous act, and what drove them to it? As detectives began to peel back the layers of this tragic case, they unearthed a chilling narrative. One that would leave the quiet town reeling. The story of Brian and Beverly began on a warm spring evening in 2001 when their paths crossed at a mutual friend's party. At that time, both were college students, unaware of the dark fate that awaited them. From the moment their eyes locked, an undeniable connection ignited between them. What started as simple curiosity blossomed into a profound bond, and soon they were inseparable. That summer marked a turning point as their relationship deepened. They introduced one another to their families, who welcomed their new partners with open arms. It was clear to everyone how perfectly Brian and Beverly complemented each other, united by their shared passion for adventure and excitement. Beverly was a vibrant spirit, an athlete whose energy seemed boundless. Excelling in both baseball and track, she had a natural talent for sports. Her musical ability shone through as she played the guitar with ease, and her aptitude for languages was remarkable. With a warm personality and an infectious smile, she effortlessly won the affection of friends and peers. Brian, however, thrived on adrenaline and adventure, drawn to extreme sports like rock climbing, surfing, and scuba diving. He relished the thrill of challenges, never allowing fear to hinder his pursuits. Despite their undeniable chemistry, they took their time with marriage. Both were dedicated to completing their studies first. After graduation, they set their sights on building a future together, saving diligently for their own home. Brian secured a position at an industrial company, while Beverly embarked on a career in hotel administration. Her proficiency in languages proved to be an invaluable asset in her new role. Finally, on May 15, 2006, they exchanged vows in a stunning seaside ceremony surrounded by their closest family and friends. Their honeymoon promised to be nothing short of an adventure. Her language skills proved invaluable in her role. On May 15, 2006, a breathtaking seaside ceremony unfolded as Brian and Beverly exchanged vows, surrounded by their closest family and friends. Their honeymoon promised to be an adventure of its own, a celebration of love and new beginnings. After their adventures in several countries, Brian and Beverly returned home to start the next chapter of their lives. They settled in the quiet town of Graham, Pennsylvania, purchasing a beautiful house nestled near a river and surrounded by a dense forest. It was the ideal place to lay down roots. Brian continued his work as an engineer while Beverly shifted her focus to translation work and pursued further studies. They quickly became woven into the fabric of the local community. As they made friends and embraced their peaceful new life, their happiness proved to be fleeting. On the morning of November 17, 2007, Brian's longtime friend, Stephen, arrived at their home, excited for a planned fishing trip. However, when he knocked on the door, no one answered. Initially, he assumed his friend had simply overslept. He knocked again, louder this time, but the silence that echoed back from inside the house ignited a sense of unease. Thinking Brian might have forgotten, Stephen waited in his car for about half an hour, attempting to call multiple times. Yet, there was still no response. Frustration gripped him, but he wasn't alarmed, yet. Eventually, he decided to go fishing alone. As hours passed without a word from Brian or Beverly, Stephen's unease deepened. That evening he returned to their house, knocking once more, but the unsettling silence persisted. This time he felt compelled to investigate further. Circling the property, he peered through the windows, but the house was shrouded in darkness. Something felt profoundly wrong. Approaching the garage, he noticed that Brian and Beverly's car was parked inside. That detail didn't add up. If they were home, why weren't they answering? Moving to the living room window, he pressed his face against the glass, straining to peer inside. The dim light outside made visibility a challenge, but something on the floor caught his eye. The television was overturned, and beside it lay a large, unmoving shape. Stephen's heart raced as he rushed to his car. Grabbing his flashlight, he directed the beam through the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. Lying motionless on the floor were two bodies, partially covered by a blood-soaked blanket. A bare foot was visible on one side. A lifeless hand emerged from the other side. Panic surged through him, and he fumbled for his phone, dialing 911. His voice trembled as he reported the horrific sight, urgently pleading for authorities to come immediately. He remained outside, his gaze locked on the tragic scene unfolding before him. When the officers arrived, Stephen was the first to be questioned. He recounted everything: the planned fishing trip, the unanswered calls, and the horrifying discovery. Regret gnawed at him, wishing he had checked the windows earlier. Inside, the scene was grim. The front door was unlocked, showing no signs of forced entry, a detail that raised immediate suspicions. Inside the home, the atmosphere was grim, and a sense of dread washed over Stephen as he wished he had checked the windows earlier. The front door stood ajar, not locked, showing no signs of forced entry. This alone ignited suspicions in his mind. In the living room, the lifeless bodies of Brian and Beverly lay just as Stephen had discovered them. Preliminary findings indicated they had been dead for at least 12 hours, each having sustained 3 gunshot wounds from a large-caliber weapon. The precision of the shots suggested that the attacker possessed a chilling deliberation, perhaps even experience. Yet there was no evidence of robbery. Their wallets, phones, and cash remained untouched, a stark contrast to the violence that had unfolded. The scene revealed no signs of a struggle, no indication that Brian or Beverly had fought back. It was as if the perpetrator had approached with a singular intent: execution. One unsettling detail emerged from the chaos. The bodies had been moved post-mortem. Blood smeared across the floor revealed drag marks, and the perpetrator had attempted, albeit clumsily, to clean up the aftermath. Streaks of blood marred the walls and furniture, tracing the brutal sequence of events. Despite the apparent effort to erase evidence, forensic specialists meticulously followed the trail. 6 spent shell casings lay carelessly abandoned at the scene, suggesting that a single assailant had fired every shot. The evidence pointed to one individual being responsible for this heinous crime. The unlocked door raised further troubling questions. It implied that Brian and Beverly had willingly allowed their killer inside, a gesture that turned fatal. Investigators theorized that when Brian answered the knock at the door, he recognized the visitor. Perhaps he turned to lead them into the house when, without warning, 3 bullets struck him in the back. One bullet passed through his body. It shattered the television screen, sending it crashing to the floor. The sound must have drawn Beverly from the bedroom. She likely froze in horror upon witnessing her husband's lifeless body and the armed intruder standing over him. In a desperate bid to escape, she ran but didn't get far. 3 bullets struck her from behind, cutting her down in the hallway. Her body was later dragged to the living room, placed beside Brian's. The couple remained in their pajamas, indicating they had been attacked in the early morning hours. It was a time before they had even begun their day. Yet one perplexing detail lingered. The killer had covered the bodies with a blanket. Was it an act of remorse or a chilling attempt to conceal the brutality of the crime? No one could say for sure. The floor bore the marks of a hasty cleanup, blood smeared as if someone had tried to erase the horror but only exacerbated the mess. A large stain near the bodies showed signs of disturbance, hinting at the frantic aftermath of a nightmare turned real. In a shocking turn of events, it appeared that someone had attempted to erase the evidence of a violent act. Behind the couch, officers stumbled upon a plastic broom, its bristles caked with dried blood. Strikingly, its handle had been meticulously wiped clean of any fingerprints, suggesting a calculated effort to conceal the truth. The investigation indicated that the killer had used a methodical approach, employing a technique to erase bloody footprints while carefully concealing any trace of their own identity. Smudged handprints and distorted palm prints marked the walls, doors, and furniture, each too blurred to provide a clear match, showcasing the killer's attempts to obscure their presence. Forensic experts understood a crucial fact. The longer an individual lingered at a crime scene, the higher the risk of leaving behind incriminating evidence. It was during their meticulous examination that they discovered a pivotal clue, a blanket that covered the lifeless bodies of Brian and Beverly. Among the details, a faint yet significant boot print emerged. It was not a bloodstain, but an impression left in an area where only a light layer of blood had settled. The distinctive pattern was a promising lead. Forensic analysis quickly identified the boot print as belonging to a rare model of heavy-duty work boots. Investigators traced these boots back to a construction company in Clearfield County, which had recently acquired several pairs. This lead sharpened their focus. They began to scrutinize employees who had access to these boots. Another potential breakthrough surfaced when detectives discovered a palm print on one of the house's surfaces. Despite careful analysis and checks against law enforcement databases, no match was found. The perpetrator had no prior criminal record. The absence of any fingerprints in existing offender registries complicated matters. Consequently, suspicion initially fell upon Stephen, the friend who had stumbled upon the gruesome scene. Stephen had visited the house twice on that fateful day, and was the one to alert authorities. His presence during critical moments of the timeline raised questions. When detectives confronted him, he appeared visibly shaken. He recounted how he had assumed Brian and Beverly were simply asleep when they didn't respond to his knocks that morning. It was only later, after repeated attempts to reach them, that he returned to investigate further. The realization that he was being treated as a suspect left him in disbelief. Stephen insisted that he had spent the entire day fishing at a secluded spot by the river. Unfortunately, he had no one to corroborate his alibi. However, investigators possessed tools that could verify his claims. They meticulously reviewed traffic camera footage from the roads leading to and from the fishing area. The recordings confirmed Stephen's timeline. He had indeed been where he claimed to be. Further forensic testing also exonerated him. His fingerprints did not match any found at the scene, and tests for gunshot residue on his hands and clothing returned negative results. Additionally, the boot print discovered at the crime scene did not correspond to his shoe size. Stephen had no affiliation with the construction company that had purchased the boots. With no physical evidence linking him to the crime, he was officially ruled out as a suspect. As detectives sought new leads, they began canvassing the neighborhood for potential witnesses. When investigators approached the home of Daniel and Jennifer Tavares, situated directly across from Brian and Beverly, they finally encountered a breakthrough. Daniel answered the door, explaining that his wife, Jennifer, was at work, but he was willing to share what he knew. As he spoke, Daniel recounted a pivotal moment from the morning of the murders. At approximately 5:30 a.m., he had been jolted awake by loud noises emanating from the couple's residence. At first, he dismissed them, but in retrospect, those sounds had unmistakably resembled gunshots. Curiosity mingled with caution as Daniel peered through his window. He noticed a white pickup truck parked conspicuously near Brian and Beverly's home, a vehicle he was certain did not belong to them. Just moments later, he observed two men exiting the house. The dim light of dawn obscured his view, but he managed to take note of critical details about the driver. The man appeared to be in his 40s, with a stocky build, long dark hair tied back in a ponytail, and a distinct mustache. Daniel's keen eye also caught a tattoo on the man's left hand, although he couldn't discern the design. Despite this promising lead, no other neighbors reported seeing the truck or its occupants. In a separate interview with detectives, Beverly's mother revealed a troubling conversation she had shared with her daughter just months prior to the tragedy. Beverly had expressed her discomfort regarding a neighbor named Jeremy Flint. This 22-year-old man was already on law enforcement's radar, known for his involvement in illegal drug activities. His home attracted a stream of suspicious visitors. Concerns about Jeremy's presence echoed through the community, leading investigators to classify him as a person of interest. When officers visited his residence, they found it abandoned, leading them to suspect he had fled the scene. However, conversations with local residents unveiled another potential motive. Just prior to the murders, Brian and Beverly had hosted a small gathering at their home. Jeremy, who had not been invited, arrived inebriated and disruptive, forcing his way into the party. Witnesses described his erratic behavior. He harassed female guests, hurled insults, and incited conflict among partygoers. Following a heated confrontation, he was forcibly ejected from the gathering. Yet before he stormed off, he issued a chilling threat, warning that the couple would regret humiliating him. The very next morning, Brian and Beverly discovered that several items had vanished from their home, including a cell phone and a handgun. The handgun, which had been securely stored in a pantry drawer along with ammunition, was now gone. Convinced that Jeremy was responsible for the theft, the couple confronted him at his residence. They approached with a calm demeanor but made their intentions clear. If their belongings were not returned, they would involve the authorities. Jeremy denied any wrongdoing, steadfastly refusing to return the stolen items. However, the following day, in an unexpected twist, the missing belongings mysteriously reappeared in the couple's backyard. The handgun, a chilling discovery, was found stored in a pantry drawer alongside its ammunition. Convinced that Jeremy Flint was behind the unsettling theft, the couple decided to confront him at his home. They maintained a calm demeanor but made their intentions clear. If their belongings were not returned, they would have no choice but to involve the authorities. With an air of defiance, Jeremy denied any wrongdoing, refusing to return the stolen items. Yet the following day, the couple was astonished to find their missing belongings had mysteriously reappeared in their backyard, leaving them with more questions than answers. Despite lacking concrete evidence, Brian and Beverly were convinced that Jeremy had trespassed onto their property under the cover of night. Although the immediate threat seemed resolved, an unsettling feeling clung to Beverly, refusing to let go. The fear of solitude began to consume Beverly, prompting her to urge Brian to consider relocating to a different neighborhood altogether. Meanwhile, Jeremy resurfaced several days after the murders, and detectives wasted no time in bringing him in for questioning. However, their suspicions soon began to dissipate. In a twist of fate, Jeremy had been out of town during the time of the crime. He had traveled to another state to visit his parents, remaining with them for nearly a week, and returning only the day after the killings. His alibi was unassailable. Multiple witnesses corroborated his account, placing him miles away from the crime scene on that fateful night. Further forensic analysis confirmed his innocence, as his fingerprints and palm prints did not match any found at the site of the horrific events. Additionally, investigators discovered that he had no ties to the distinctive work boots that had emerged as critical evidence in the case. With no links to the crime, Jeremy was swiftly cleared as a suspect, leaving investigators back at square one. With their strongest lead evaporated, the detectives found themselves in desperate need of a breakthrough. They returned to the only witness who had provided any useful information, Daniel Tavares. Initially, Daniel had reported spotting a suspicious white pickup truck near Brian and Beverly's residence at the time of the crime. However, upon revisiting the matter, Daniel's story had taken a perplexing turn. He suddenly claimed to have vivid recollections of what the perpetrators wore, even going so far as to describe one of the men as having a scar on his cheek. This contradicted his original statement, in which he had insisted that the men's faces were obscured by hoodies. Detectives, sensing something amiss, requested that Daniel show them the window from which he had allegedly observed the scene that morning. Upon inspection, they quickly realized that even in broad daylight, it was exceedingly difficult to discern any clear details across the street. Given that the murders had occurred before dawn, it seemed implausible that Daniel could have seen so much. His changing narrative raised an ominous question. Had Daniel been fabricating his account all along? And if that were the case, what could have motivated him? A deeper dive into Daniel's past revealed a troubling history. Born in 1966 into a strict military family, his early years were marred by adversity. At the tender age of 4, his parents divorced. As investigators delved deeper into Daniel Tavares' past, they uncovered a disturbing history. Born in 1966 to a strict military family, his early years were steeped in hardship. When Daniel was just 4 years old, his parents' marriage crumbled, leading to a painful divorce. The aftermath of the divorce left Daniel and his 3 older sisters under the care of their mother. Meanwhile, their father swiftly remarried, distancing himself from his children and exhibiting little interest in their lives. By the time Daniel reached the tumultuous age of 9th grade, his life had spiraled into chaos, setting the stage for the events that would follow. As a troubled youth, he had dropped out of school, frequently run away from home, and found himself entangled in petty thefts. At just 18, he faced his first arrest, charged with robbery. In a surprising turn of events, his estranged father intervened, managing to secure him a probation sentence, thus averting jail time. Perhaps motivated by guilt, Daniel wanted to give his son another chance. However, he squandered it. Over the years, he spiraled further into crime, repeatedly arrested for theft and drug-related offenses. Each time, he received light sentences. In the late 1980s, Daniel's father made one last desperate attempt to set him on the right path. He brought his son to Florida, paid for an expensive rehabilitation program, and helped him find stable employment. However, it didn't last. Within 6 months, Daniel was caught stealing once again. This time, his father relinquished hope and sent him back to live with his mother, a decision that would have dire consequences. By then, Daniel's mental state had deteriorated significantly. He was soon diagnosed with schizophrenia and prescribed medication. However, he rarely adhered to the treatment. Instead, he mixed the medication with alcohol, leading to bouts of violent and unpredictable behavior. In July 1991, a heated argument with his mother escalated into something unimaginable. In a sudden frenzied attack, Daniel grabbed a knife and stabbed her nearly 30 times. She succumbed to her injuries before help could arrive. At his trial, Daniel claimed he heard voices, a defense that could have opened the door to an insanity plea. However, psychiatric evaluations concluded that he was fully aware of his actions. He was ultimately sentenced to 20 years in prison. Despite being sentenced to 20 years, Daniel Tavares was released on parole in 2006, serving significantly less time than anticipated. While incarcerated, he began exchanging letters with Jennifer Tavares. Over time, their correspondence blossomed into a romantic relationship. Jennifer remained unwavering in her devotion, waiting patiently for Daniel's release. As soon as he was paroled, the two married, and Daniel moved into her home in Graham, a small, quiet town, seemingly ready to start anew. However, by relocating to another state, Daniel violated the terms of his parole. He should have been arrested immediately, but a troubling combination of bureaucratic failures and police negligence allowed him to slip through the system unnoticed. A clerical error resulted in Daniel's fingerprints being erased from law enforcement databases, effectively rendering him invisible to authorities. This mistake would prove crucial, especially after investigators discovered a bloody handprint at the crime scene. At the Mock's crime scene, there was no immediate match in any records. Further investigation uncovered another alarming detail. Daniel had briefly worked for the construction company that had purchased the rare work boots linked to the murder. Despite these troubling connections, detectives lacked the direct evidence necessary for an arrest. They needed a solid case before proceeding. On November 24, 2007, detectives invited Daniel to the police station, luring him under the pretense of assisting in the creation of composite sketches. Eager to cooperate, Daniel agreed, spending nearly an hour crafting completely fabricated portraits. As he focused on the sketches, he unwittingly placed himself deeper into the investigation, unaware of the web tightening around him. An officer casually entered the room, casually announcing the need for Daniel's fingerprints, just to rule him out as a suspect. For the first time, Daniel hesitated. Yet, after a brief moment of contemplation, he relented, convinced that his prints could not possibly be linked to the crime scene. Just moments later, another officer casually mentioned a significant discovery: a bloody handprint found inside the Mock home. Instantly, Daniel's demeanor shifted, tension palpable in the air. He nervously confessed that he had visited the Mock residence in the past, acknowledging the unsettling possibility that his fingerprints might be present. The officer tried to reassure him, suggesting there was no need for concern. After all, the handprint was soaked in blood. This revelation indicated that the true killer had left this damning evidence behind at the scene. At that critical moment, a second detective redirected the conversation toward Daniel's troubling past, bringing up the crime for which he had previously served time. When pressed, Daniel admitted to killing his mother. What unfolded next left investigators in shock. Rather than showing any hint of remorse, Daniel recounted the chilling details of his mother's murder with unsettling clarity. As he described the attack, a smile crept across his face, revealing an eerie detachment from the horror of his actions. His tone was almost boastful, reminiscent of someone reliving a proud achievement. As he continued his disturbing monologue, forensic analysts completed their grim task. The bloody handprint from the crime scene had matched Daniel Tavares perfectly. When detectives confronted Daniel with the incontrovertible evidence, The smugness that had once adorned his face vanished in an instant. His hands balled into fists, and his eyes darkened with fury. Before he could react further, officers restrained him and placed him under arrest. Confronted with undeniable proof, Daniel recognized he had no escape. Under the weight of the evidence, he confessed to the events of that fateful morning. The night before, he had indulged in hours of heavy drinking and drug use at the bar. By the time Daniel ran out of money, he had become belligerent and aggressive. The bar staff, unable to tolerate his antics any longer, ejected him, warning that they would call the police if his disruptive behavior continued. Humiliated and filled with rage, Daniel fixated on a troubling thought. Brian owed him money. A month prior, Daniel had given Brian a tattoo as a friendly gesture, but now, in his intoxicated haze, he had convinced himself that Brian had taken advantage of him. He believed he was owed $50 for the work. Determined to collect what he believed was rightfully his, Daniel resolved to confront Brian, no matter the cost. At 5:00 a.m., still simmering with anger, he seized his revolver and made his way to the Mock residence. When Brian answered the door, he appeared groggy and irritated, clearly unprepared for the early morning visit. Without preamble, Daniel demanded payment for the tattoo. Confused and taken aback, Brian refused, suggesting that Daniel should return when he was sober. Unwilling to back down, Daniel pressed the issue, not wanting to engage in a fruitless argument. Brian sighed, turning toward the bedroom to retrieve some cash, hoping this would persuade Daniel to leave. As he walked away, Brian made an offhand remark, words Daniel interpreted as an insult. In a blind rage, Daniel drew his gun and shot Brian 3 times in the back. The gunfire shattered the stillness of the night, jolting Beverly from her sleep. She rushed out of the bedroom, her heart pounding, only to find her husband, Brian, lying motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. In that harrowing moment, her gaze locked with Daniel Tavares, the very man who still clutched the smoking revolver. Instinctively sensing the imminent danger, Beverly turned to flee. But before she could escape, 3 bullets struck her from behind, tearing through her body with merciless precision. Once the horrific act was committed, Daniel panicked, fleeing the scene and racing home. Once inside, Daniel woke his wife, Jennifer Tavares. Yet, rather than reacting with shock or horror, she barely flinched. Without a moment's hesitation, she agreed to assist him in covering up the crime. Together, they returned to the Mock's house, where darkness loomed. Jennifer helped move Beverly's lifeless body into the living room, laying her beside Brian. With grim determination, she grabbed a blanket and covered both victims, masking the tragedy that had unfolded. It was she who suggested using a broom to erase the incriminating bloody footprints. With meticulous care, she wiped down every surface, ensuring no obvious prints remained. Yet, in her haste, she overlooked one crucial detail. Once the cleanup was complete, Daniel disposed of the murder weapon, casting it into a nearby river, hoping to erase the evidence of his crime. Despite extensive searches, the gun was never recovered. With his confession and the mounting forensic evidence against him, Daniel found himself ensnared in a web of his own making. Ultimately, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, Jennifer, claiming she had acted out of fear, chose to cooperate fully with investigators. In the end, she received a mere 1-year sentence for tampering with evidence. Though the case appeared to be resolved, the dark history of Daniel Tavares was far from over. Years later, in 2015, the past resurfaced in a chilling fashion. New homeowners, unaware of the horrors that had once transpired, began renovations on the house where Daniel had lived with his mother. As they dug into the backyard, they unearthed a grim discovery. Buried deep within the soil lay human remains. Forensic analysis confirmed the haunting truth. The bones belonged to a young woman who had vanished in 1990. As detectives pieced together the narrative, a disturbing reality began to unfold. Daniel had known the woman. She was a neighbor. Initially, he had shown interest in her, but when she rejected his advances, he responded with lethal violence. To avoid capture, he buried her in his mother's backyard, where her body lay hidden for decades. This new evidence led to Daniel receiving a second life sentence. It became painfully clear that Daniel Tavares had always been a predator lurking in the shadows, evading justice for years, until finally, the truth caught up with him. Thank you for tuning in to my channel. If you are intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, where we delve into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Join us as we delve into the gripping true crime stories that haunt Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations that expose the dark underbelly of society.